not so extreme as to sort of pigeonhole its appeal, I guess. Blackbraid and his album Blackbraid 2. Blackbraid is a name that really surfaced last year with, shockingly, the Blackbraid 1 album. Very, smooth turnaround of another record here. And every now and then, you get something from a world like black metal that gets a lot kind of bigger voices on board with it. And Blackbraid pretty immediately was that. We didn't get the moment to review that first one, but it was totally on the radar as like something that was really turning heads. And so it only feels right to talk about the next one now. Elliot, did you have much of kind of Blackbraid like crossing your path in terms of like the last year or so?
Yes, I saw the name a lot when the record came out last year, but I never got around to it. It was one of those things where it felt like it almost, because it got popular so quickly, it kind of hurdled over the black metal circles talking about it.
Yeah, it felt like a very similar thing to what happened with Zealanada in that regard.
Yeah, exactly that, and that took me a while to get around to as well, just because, not like it's a media plant or an industry plant or anything cynical like that, but I don't know, there was something about it which didn't really reach out and grab me straight away. I think part of it, to be honest, and I understand why this was so widely reported on, because it is an interesting aspect to the record, and a central aspect, in fact, but it felt like a lot of the things I was reading were making more of a thing about the artist's origin than it was the record they're in. And there's been a few times where that's happened, where it feels like that story is sold in place of having great music, and it's maybe quite cynical about those kind of stories. So I kind of had tabs on it, but I never went back and checked it out, but I certainly will now.
Yeah, and this is a primarily one-man project, although there's a live band that recently has been on stages on the kind of the Decibel tour with Count as the Application and the like, getting some rave reviews there. I think there is a session drummer on this album, but primarily it's one guy. Literally formed in February of 2022, so very, very quick with getting this whole project off the ground. Now he's getting features in like the New York Times. That's where this is going. It's a guy who goes by the name Skargasoa, I believe is the pronunciation, and he comes from a Native American background, which he is very much channeling into this black metal project. The first album I liked. It did feel like almost like it could be a first EP compared to this being like the debut album. It's a bit similar to maybe like how kind of some of the early Mirka stuff sort of felt leading into where she went with it. There were a couple of really good songs there that kind of stood out, and now this project has gone from like just over half an hour to, including like I guess the bonus track here, over an hour, this one. So literally it's like, it really feels like the second album means a lot more business, despite the only year turnaround. And I think that's why it's the perfect time for us to really kind of bring this forward. I think this album is really beginning to kind of deliver on the promise of Blackbraid, and certainly will draw in a lot of people for something like this and the kind of world it has origins in.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I think this album is really excellent. And it's an album that, while all the factors that go into it are present and correct and important, it doesn't feel like it's overridden by its concepts. Anyway, like listening to it, you can know all the context around Blackbraid, and it maybe enhances the listening experience, but for me, this is just super high quality, fiery, imperious black metal. And most of the albums that have stood out to me in black metal this year are more of the sort of obtuse, experimental kind. Right. So it's really refreshing to me to have something new that is this kind of, I wouldn't go as far as to say blockbuster, but nearer to the sort of behemoth end than it is the liturgy end. Yeah,
well, I mean, the bass sound of this it's that strain of American black metal that is kind of particularly sort of celebratory of kind of, nature and the earth in its sounds. The guy very clearly loves Agalloch, also Wolf in the Throne Room, Panopticon, etc. A lot of the kind of heavier guitar tones sound like Wayfarer to me. 100% there is loads of like very melodic black metal stuff like Uada as well, and kind of bringing those things together. But also there is a very direct kind of melodic heavy metal sensibility with how big the sound is that I think, in terms of like an extreme band who kind of, or again, almost jump over appealing to a lot of extreme metal heads and just go, hey, metal fans, you like us. Amon Amarth and stuff like that, and that kind of that relatability in terms of the crossover appeal that this is having. There is a kind of modernity about this, despite how rootsy the atmosphere is, that does make you go, oh, that kind of would sound big on a big stage.
Yeah, Monomorph was one of the bands that came to mind for me on the Twilight Hymn of Ancient Blood.
Right.
When that all slows down, it's so with Odin on our side. It's all just like might and stomp. And again, the bands you've talked about, Agalloch, Panopticon, that sort of thing, stomp and crunch and fist in the air is not their forte so much. It's more about world building and subsuming you in a particular environment. And this having a bit of that heavy metal flair makes this just rattle along in a way that I think those bands, not necessarily to their detriment, but maybe halt some of their appeal in certain circles.
Yeah, well, I think, again, the reverse of that conversation is my sort of fear with Blackbraid when it was kind of first surfacing was that something like, again, if you take bands like an Agalloch or whatever, but if you made a kind of more mainstream palatable version of them, is that we would have something like that but without the real depth and with the real magic, right? And I think in order to be able to sort of sell that, you need to really make the songs work, and I think that is really what's happening on this Blackbraid record. That it's like, okay, these like compositions and the songs and that kind of, again, that rousing heavy metal spirit and everything is like powerful enough now that it doesn't need to sound like, you know, the Mantle or whatever, or, you know, Died Ever 12 Stars, whatever you may say. There's just a real, like, it's very easy to understand this. Like, it's not a murky black metal project in the slightest. It feels huge and immediate, and the chord progressions feel like they have a very sort of clear emotional sort of goal they're moving towards. The production sounds really warm and brilliant. When it goes like full throttle with the double bass and everything, it's really earthy and powerful. And it still has, again, like, I think the usage of things like the acoustic intros and interludes and all that is very well done. It's not kind of disconnected and just there for show. It just really sets you up to kind of enter the palette of the record incredibly tastefully. But The Spirit Returns is like a 4.5-minute song that just has this really ear-catching main riff, and for the kind of thing that it is, it's just a very concise, direct song that shows a very strong sense of songcraft. It's a genuine tune.
Yeah, it's funny we were talking about Paradise Lost earlier, because they had that same kind of flavour where it was gothic, it was theatrical, it was all of those things, but because it was centred around an easily decipherable vocalist and big riffs, it could have had this sort of populist appeal. And The Spirit Returns is almost like Icon, Shades of God era, Paradise Lost, played fast and harder, because the riffs and hooks are so easy to pick out in the whirlwind.
Yeah.
That it's not, you're not kind of straining to hear the song. It's plops right in front of you.
Yeah, I think that's, I guess, the primary appeal of this is how like The Wolf That Guides the Hunter's Hand is maybe my favourite song on this record, because when it just locks into that kind of galloping double bass part, it just feels brilliant. Like, you don't have to mess around with it. It's just so thick and powerful. You go, yeah, good, I get this. And when that song goes double time, that is really a Modern Marth, like very kind of almost like old school versus the world stuff or whatever. A Song of Death on Winds of Dawn opens with this lead that could be like Michael Amott or something, like just very like well-conditioned hair blowing in the wind, before the rest of the song goes that much more kind of, you know, melodic Uada style kind of blast. It's just a thing that I love. So there's a constant sense of kind of emotion in the melody that it's very, you know, plainly kind of melodic extreme metal playing that is meant to, you know, kind of rouse the soul in some way, and it sells that so well. There's a slower riff break towards the end of The Wolf That Guides the Hunter's Hand, and that goes super kind of melodic doom, but in a really beautiful way, and I think they kind of land those moments increasingly well.
Yeah, and Moss Covered Bones on The Altar of the Moon, which is the most War to the Throne Room title that they haven't used. Like, that starts like a dirge, and it gradually builds the tempo and the intensity, and it goes from something pretty downtrodden into a sort of triumphant new wave of British heavy metal gallop. And then this ecstasy in the final act with these dueling leads. It's really great musical storytelling, which you don't have to appreciate it on that level. You can just enjoy the parts.
Yeah, I mean, that's the longest track on the record. It's 13.5 minutes long, which for something that if you are kind of hearing us talk about it without having heard the record, and you're like, oh, you know, it must be just a very, very simple, straightforward, you know, nuts and bolts thing. No, he's still capable of going really fucking, you know, kind of methodical in its pacing and everything. But it's so kind of legible in what it's doing. Like, it is very clearly this big, epic, heavy metal kind of march that when kind of layering the guitar leads and stuff on top of that, that's what kind of makes it immersive, and that's what makes it really sort of pop. Vocally, again, bands like Agalloch and Uada are sort of the reference points, but it's that weird sort of thing of like, more appealing than it should be on paper, like a sort of shrill gurgle that is weirdly, oddly tuneful. It just fits in really well in this kind of, modern metal sounding mix. And if you are expecting kind of tons of like folk instrumentation or whatever, it's very subtle. There are, again, those like acoustic interludes and stuff which are really beautiful. They have that kind of feel of the wilds about them that really, really works for the mood of the record. But in the kind of long metal tracks themselves, it's not like a constant barrage of like fiddle lines or whatever all the time. It's big moments where something really, really takes the fore and elevates something, like in the middle of a Song of Death. There's kind of or as well, Moss Covered Bones, about 6.5 minutes in, there's like a really big flute melody that takes it over. And those moments, again, just he knows how to time these things well.
Autumnal Hearts Ablaze has that kind of fuzzy, rustic acoustic quality, which lends a level of realism to the record, I think. And in the way that Battery lends drama and grit to Master of Puppets, or the intro of that at least. And again, like we're talking about things like Panopticon, Wolves of the Throne Room, I'm sure there'll be some people listening who think maybe it delves into sort of hey nonny nonny and slightly too much, bit too dance around the maypole. There's none of that. It doesn't lose the grit or the drama or make it sound remotely silly. It just sort of heightens all of those things.
Yeah, well, again, that sort of strain of American black metal that we're talking about, I don't think ever does go for that sort of more, I guess, twee end of like sort of folk black metal or whatever. But this definitely feels like a much more immediately obvious in kind of like having that kind of metal power behind it version that can really, really sell to people. And that, I mean, speaking of Metallica, the thrash metal riff in the middle of Twilight Hymn of Ancient Blood, where does that come from? Like that's a real detour. That just fully turns into like a blackened thrash Metallica part for a minute.
Yeah, that was a real head-spinning moment, because, again, so much of this album, in a sense, is about world building, but maybe less so than some of the things that influence it, because for long stretches of it, it seems like they're just interested in hitting that spot that heavy metal can do when it's done great. And I think balancing those two things, it's not easy, because, like you were saying, that adding the elements of modernity, you think it could kind of maybe dull the impact of either, in a sense. But the way it's put together, when those moments happen, they just provide a lift that makes the record so much more exciting, especially towards the end of the hour runtime.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely like if he can find a kind of sweet spot between these two releases that he's done in terms of like sort of length and substance, kind of really finding enough ideas to really justify this heft of a record. I like everything on this, but just kind of keep honing it and keep making these structures work to the best of their ability. I think this is again, considering this band was formed like a year and a half ago, this is album number 2 that is basically doubled in length from the first record. I think it's very dramatic progress, I think we're seeing. And that is, again, I liked Blackbraid. I'm now very, very keen to see kind of where this continues going. And then I'm not sure if this is part of the standard edition of the album or not. I mentioned it earlier. But at the end, when he covers the masterpiece song that is A Fine Day to Die by Bathory, I know Emperor have already well worn that particular cover version, but I swear Blackbraid do it like way faster. Like, this is a really fucking hard-hitting, like urgent Fine Day to Die.
Yeah, I mean, to me, my estimations of this album is slightly affected by whether or not that's a bonus track, because it's a great cover, and like you say, it's a classic. But again, when you're sort of in the world, there is something slightly distracting about that iconic opening guitar refrain coming in. Like, I mean, I'll never get sick of hearing A Fine Day to Die. But
yeah, it's like literally, it's one of the fucking like text like epic black metal songs of all time.
Yeah, it's one of the best songs on one of the best black metal records ever made. But it is a bit like maybe if the next Unto Others record ended on a cover of Christian Woman or something. It's like, well, I'm sure that would be great, but you would also maybe have a mixed feeling about that.
I don't know. For me, it's almost like kind of, it's always the way with black metal. I like sort of like nodding the hat and paying tribute in a way. And again, I like that obviously this is a black metal record that like could not be released in a decade prior to at least the last one. Right, like in terms of how it sounds, in terms of its mix of influences, in terms of where it's coming from, it is super, super like this is where black metal is right now, and I like that goes. But we've still got time to knock out a Bathory cover for you guys, so I think that's cool. I think instrumentally and in its kind of songwriting style, It sounds a lot like bands who I really love. Again, the sort of main reference points we're mentioning, so like not the most original there necessarily. That it speaks to a particular part of my brain that goes, yes, I love that stuff. And then the extra elements of his own personality that are really being blended in on top are giving this its own kind of feel and identity. And plain and simple, the songwriting and the riff writing and the power in the sound and everything is getting better all the time. So I think it's not quite one of my very favourite black metal records of the year, but I can absolutely see why it'd be one of the most widely acclaimed, because it's just so kind of satisfying in a big, full, obvious kind of way. So Blackbraid 2, if you are just a metal fan, I would encourage you to give that one a bash and see what you make of it.